What a week. Well, um, I don't have much to say here. We'll just give it a couple of seconds so people can arrive. This might be the worst idea I've had, or it could be the best idea I've had. This is going to be totally off the cuff. There was no planning into this whatsoever. I think basically what this is going to do is basically just be my own personal thoughts on the matter and maybe mix it up with a what I feel are the important incidents that led to the events of September 11th and my own personal thoughts on the matter and what has come from it. Um, but this was not planned. This is a off the cuff video, very laid back, not like the other videos where I had an outline about what I wanted to talk about. So that's why this might be a disaster, but this might be a good thing. It might not even be memorable. But either way, um, this is going to be just my own thoughts on the matter, mixed with some factual information about incidents that led to 9/11 in general. And, so many people ask me that, what are my thoughts about 9/11? What could I say about it in general? Man. And a lot of people really don't understand the context that you can't talk about 9/11 in 5 minutes. That's impossible. For me, it is. Maybe it could be done with other people that are much more, I guess, not as confusing as I can be. Um, Maybe they could do it in 10 minutes. I can't even do that. And I think even 30 minutes is not going to give you the the real picture about 9/11 because it basically just I mean, you could probably do it with JFK. You probably could do it with the assassination of Martin Luther King. You could probably do it uh, with the assassination of Robert Kennedy. 9/11 is basically a huge incident that involved a number of foreign governments, intelligence services, and incidents which led up to 9/11. What basically were the precipitating factors leading up to 9/11. And it's frustrating because you want to appease people, you want to invite people to the subject, and you can't because you basically have to delve into so many topics that basically all have a connection. And if you leave one out, it'll come back to you in the long run after the event. And basically, oh, I forgot to add this. Or, hey, wait a minute, how did this fit into 9/11? And because you didn't explain it in time. And that's what led me to do the series with Richard Cox, um, Road to 9/11, because that idea came from, it was an original idea. It was basically what I wanted to do in video format, or try to anyway, of what Paul Thompson did with the terror timeline. Paul Thompson did it in written format. I wanted to do it in cheap video format. And I don't know whether it came even close to even what Paul Thompson did. But from that idea came the podcast, Talking Hour. And, at the beginning, it was a tough road because you want to build up your channel and you want to get to important people. And you don't want to you want to stay away from like the fringe elements because even though they could get you those people, you still want to keep your reputation intact. And I thought that was really important because if I interview somebody that's less than credible, I don't have any credibility and nobody will come on my show. And basically, after like a year or two, I basically got the attention of certain people and they came on. It was a rough go. I almost quit, but after a while, I got on a really good roll. I was very fortunate and lucky, um, and it worked. It worked out. 85 episodes now, 86 actually, and I got to interview some very important people, and I was very happy with it. But it was, not all me, and Richard Cox had a lot to do with it. I consider him the backbone, even though he's not involved with it anymore. But initially, it was, he was a big part of it, and there was other people down the line that were instrumental. Nelson Martins was one. Uh, Later on, Sean Russell and Darren Harvey came along, and I had a lot of help along the way, and it helped because I wasn't alone and there was other people. But boy, was this a frustrating road. I can tell you. I'm very stoic, and there's one person in this chat room who can attest to my very steely nature because he knows me personally. But since I began this road to 9/11 back in 2006, I mean, I could tell you right now, this is more more frustrating than it was appealing. And if I had to do it again, I probably wouldn't. And I'm at this point now where basically I have nothing else. I know that sports really important, and that was a big influence on my life. I was a Yankee fan for over 30 something years. I really love sports. Sports has changed. The world has changed. And I don't like sports anymore. I know it's non important to the bigger things in life, but it's almost like when you have knowledge. I learned this over the years is that if you possess any knowledge, whether it's a lot or even just a tiny minuscule, what happens is you sacrifice your innocence, and that is your ignorance. There are some people that have knowledge but have some ignorance, and I'm a little bit jealous of those people. Um, because I have basically, once I turned on the switch, there's no turning off. In other words, I can't go back to a point in time like I was in 1997 or 96 and be as carefree and happy as I was then. Because what did I know back then? Nothing. I was ignorant young guy and rooting for the Yankees and Celtics and didn't know anything about foreign policy or religious fundamentalism or even fucking Ramsey Youssef was, right? Um, I could curse. It's a laid back discussion. So, um, but boy, when I look back on it now, I wish I could go back to that point just to see for a day what it's like to be carefree and ignorant and innocent. And we all have that wish that we can return in time and basically return to a point in time where we were the most happiest. And I'm not religious, I'm atheist, but I have a more fascinating understanding of the Bible and the Quran and the Talmud than I did back then, or even when I was studying monotheism before I studied 9/11. There's a passage in the New Testament that basically says, and it's Christ speaking. He says, "Verily I say unto you, that if you not do not come to me as children, you will never see heaven." And if you took that literally, you would think that you will never see heaven if you don't go back as children, right? When you were 5 or 6. But I don't think he was talking literally. I think he meant it as an allegorical theme. In other words, I'll try to explain. Oh, I'm not talking about heaven and hell in a linear term. Talking about it in a metaphysical. And what I'm saying is that I think what he was messaging was that heaven is a place of happiness, peace, ignorance, not of this world, meaning here, the worldly problems. And when were we most happiest? When we were young, right? Every old man that you've ever, every old man and woman that you ever came across, just about generally once told you, back in my day, right? And what happens? They're talking about when they were young and carefree and innocent. You'll never hear an old man say it was greater when I'm 80, better than when I was 5 generally. And I think that's what Christ was talking about in that sense, that plane of heaven. In order to return to that happiest state, you have to let go of the worldly state, the state that you're in now. That's what I always interpreted it as. And 9/11 took that away from it. I mean, finished it. The worldly state of 9/11 took away all my innocence and ignorance because I really invigorated myself with 9/11 and I went over and beyond like most average people. I've always been fascinated with true crime and I have over 200 books on true crime, more than any topic, even 9/11. I have like 80 books on 9/11, but 200 on true crime. I studied forensic psychology in college and I wish I would have stuck with that and I didn't. But I'm always fascinated about the motivations of why these people hijacked planes and crashed them. To me, back in 2005 and 6, I didn't know anything about martyrdom, Wahhabism, anything about foreign policy that relates to 9/11, what brought up 9/11. And so that's to me was more fascinating than say what the trendy topic that has always been very catchy with most truthers and even debunkers about how buildings 1, 2, and 7 fell. And even though I consider that a very important subject, I'm not interested in physics because I couldn't tell you how those buildings fell because one, physics is not my forte. In fact, I'm terrible at it. Um, and it's something that doesn't resonate with me. I was not very good in math, so it was one subject that I tended not to concentrate on. And back in 2006, very few people were talking about the motivations, what led up to this event. And one of the first people I came across was Paul Thompson. I'm very fortunate. Yeah, I've watched Loose Change. I've watched In Plain Sight. That was the first things I came across. In fact, most skeptics, most debunkers came from a conspiratorial background, just like atheists came came from a religious background, no matter the time frame, whether you were a theist or a Christian or a Muslim or Jewish for many years or just for a short while. But to make that change, you basically came from a religious background, just like with skeptics and debunkers in 9/11. They started out with the conspiratorial background because that's what dominated viral media back then in 2005 and 6. If not, Paul Thompson's a household name, and he should be. Kevin Fenton as well. Kyle Hentz is another. I bet you a lot of people in this room don't even know who Kyle Hentz is. Look him up. One of the very first people. In fact, he's before Paul Thompson. Started uh, Citizens for 9/11 Inquiry with John Judge. He was a co-founder. So you had important people, but they were really not at the forefront because back in 2005 and 6, Loose Change came out in 2006. I think In Plain Sight came out in 2005. And there was a number of other conspiratorial films before that too. Um, and then after Loose Change, I mean, it blew up. Loose Change was all the way around the world, and it's still to this day the most memorable 9/11 film. It's also the most erroneous. It affected millions of people. And that's what happened. Infected so many people, and it came at such an important time because conspiracy just took off. I mean, we were really starting to feel it around 2000, 2001. And to really give you a perspective about how much conspiracy affected the American consciousness, heck, the world consciousness, and I'll just stick with the American consciousness. We have to go back to 1993, and I'm not talking about the World Trade Center bombing, because even with the World Trade Center bombing, people believed it right off the bat. Oh man, religious fundamentalism, what is that? We had no idea what religious fundamentalism was. Even during the 1979 invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviets, we basically didn't know anything about the Mujahideen. In fact, in 1983, we had Rambo Part 3. We were friends. Rambo's helping the Mujahideen. Remember that film? Um, so we really didn't know anything. We were generally ignorant, this country, about it. Wahhabism, what it meant, what it entailed, and what grew out of it. So the 93 bombing really didn't have much in the way of conspiracy. Not right off the bat. Wasn't until days later. In fact, 2 days later, when the FBI investigated a religious fundamentalist of his own right, David Koresh. And it was all over the TV. Unlike the 93 bombing, which lasted about a week, this took precedence because what came from this was worse than what happened in 93 visually. Not talking about in the overall sense, because 93 would come back to haunt us in the long run. Waco hurt us in the long run in all the worst areas, especially the public consciousness. And on April 19th, 1993, we saw on TV all around the world ABC, CBS, CNN, Fox, WOR, WPIX here in New York, live coverage of the compound in flames. And people were flabbergasted by it. Right the moment when the FBI and the ATF went across those barricades and crashed into those complexes, the resounding response was murder, conspiracy, federal government. We didn't have that with the 93 bombing. We had it with Waco right off the bat. A year later, we had an investigation. Covered the FBI, covered the ATF. In fact, I have the entire committee hearing uploaded on my YouTube channel. And people ask me, why do you have that uploaded YouTube channel? And usually I have a lot of playlists. I have like 50 something playlists. And they all correlate one another in some way and fashion to 9/11. I want people to understand that in order to understand 9/11, you have to understand many different areas. How the government works, how foreign policy works, how religious fundamentalism works, how Israel, Saudi Arabia, United States come into play, their long-standing relationships, how conspiracy works, how hearings work. It's a lot. And I want people to be informed. But Waco was really the wake-up call. conspiracy abound. Even the infamous comedian Bill Hicks would continually bring up Waco. One individual who we didn't know then would take it to heart and commit an action in 2 years later in response to the Waco attacks. But we didn't know it then. And his name is Timothy McVeigh. And what happened on April 19th, 1995? 2 years to the date of the Waco incident. We had the Alpha P. Murrah building bombing, in which, according to the government, only Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols precipitated. But we know that's not true. But yet, this bombing was from not religious fundamentalists, but from apolitical fundamentalists with extremist backgrounds of a different kind. We didn't know it then, but there was also undertones of Islamic fundamentalism for a little bit involved with this bombing, because according to the federal government and also from an informant inside a religious fundamentalist unit called Abu Sayyaf in the Philippines, an informant by the name of Edwin Angelines, who went by uh, Ibrahim Yaqub, who is a high ranking member of the Abu Sayyaf. He said that just weeks prior to the bombing, he saw a white man who he nicknamed the farmer, and his name was Terry Nichols. Who was in the Philippines at the same time as him? Our good friend Ramzi Youssef, the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. What did they learn? Did they learn bomb making skills from Ramzi Youssef? Maybe. We just have the words of Edwin Angelines. But why would he lie? Anyway, the Alfred P. Murrah building bombing really caused a stir. And basically, later on, we have more questions. Who is John Doe number two? How come there were reports of other bombs in the building? So all of a sudden, in just 2 years' time, we had a growing cementing, a growing ferment of conspiracy involving. Right around this time, Alex Jones from Houston starts popping up. Loud, very obtuse, in your face, gravelly. And at the same time, you also have Bill Cooper and AM Coast Radio. So you had a number of these people spouting up like around 93, 94, talking about government conspiracies involving Waco and the Murrah P. building bombing. And then we had a bombing in East Africa, but this time it came from radical fundamentalists. This was the bombing of the East Africa embassies in Dar es Salaam and Kenya and Tanzania. Not much in the way of conspiracy, right? People just took it, just like 93, right face value. They hate us. We're at war with bin Laden. All of a sudden, this name start popping up. Bin Laden hates the United States. He's waging war against us. But it wasn't global. I mean, even though his fatwa in 98 was global, but it wasn't really affecting us because the news didn't blare it as much. Unlike Waco and the Alfred P. Murrah building bombing, where we have visuals of the bombed out building in Oklahoma City, and of course, the burning building in Waco, Texas, seared in our memory. And the voices of Bill Cooper and Alex Jones blaring that there's some level of conspiracy involving the US government. The government has to be involved. A couple of years later, we had another incident. And this incident would become a real big problem because right here would start the problem of irresponsible conspiracies. And this was the Y2K problem. And I remember it clearly that this would have potential computer errors relating to format and storage, that the computers all around the world would not be able to recognize 000 and couldn't make the distinguish between 2000 and the year 1900. And it would ruin the banking system around the world. It would cause a big spectacle. And unlike what we saw with the Oklahoma City bombing, unlike what we saw with Waco, a number of religious, Christian, evangelical cultists, end of the world scenarios came from this. Anti-social movements got involved. Alex Jones got involved. Bill Cooper got involved. You name it. Joseph Camping of the camping crew where they believe that on a certain date you have to give up all your possessions because you're going to be floating in the air. Revelations, evangelical Christianity, everybody got on board and for all the wrong reasons. And what happened was this caused widespread fear in the public consciousness because people started believing them because with fringe conspiracy theorists, you have a very large voice. And Alex Jones really blew up at this point and started becoming more authoritative. Jerry Falwell, a major league evangelical preacher, um, just all these types of religious fundamentalists and apolitical fringe conspiracy theorists for weeks on end put the fear in God of everybody. And so what happened was that the entire majority, a large majority of the United States was on edge with Waco, with the Oklahoma City bombing, with Y2K, conspiracies abound, Alex Jones getting popular, InfoWars starting to take off soon. Fringe elements are right there, just like a bomb. There's the fuse. And then 9/11. 9/11 happened. And on that day, I remember going to work at the Police Athletic League, which were building a warehouse in Glendale, Queens. And they gave us a day off after the second plane, after the first plane hit the tower. I got home and we went on our roofs, and I didn't live far from there. And I saw the second explosion, the second time, and then we saw the towers collapse. What I didn't know it at that time was that in the days after 9/11, the powder keg that I laid out would explode. And I didn't notice it then, but I notice it now. Was that almost in the hours after 9/11, the powder keg of conspiracy really exploded. All the questions that we had about Waco, about the Oklahoma City bombing, about Y2K, how much is government involved in these incidents? 9/11 was basically the catalyst, the precipitating incident, the factor of the most outrageous conspiracies ever imagined. Sure, you had the JFK assassination, but the conspiracies surrounding that were much more rational compared to 9/11. I mean, really, what's the most ridiculous theory attributed to JFK? The most ridiculous I ever heard was that they shot JFK from a sewer hole in the ground, or that the driver of the limo turned around and shot JFK from behind. Nowhere near as outrageous or fanatical as the theories attributed to 9/11, such as hologram planes, even in the face of tens of thousands of people who all saw and heard the plane incoming, even to the many hundreds at the Pentagon, at Shanksville, who saw and heard the plane crash into the ground and into the building. And it just doesn't end there. You had nuclear devices, suitcase nukes in the basement levels of the World Trade Center when they were built. And that's what blew up the World Trade Centers because they were supposed to. Heck, even a person by the name of Simon Shack from Let's Roll Forums, and they're still around, but they're not functional anymore. One guy in particular named Brian Stavely told me that there weren't jumpers on 9/11. Those are FBI agents throwing mannequins out windows. And he was serious. So when I tell you about fanatical conspiracy theories attributed to 9/11, it didn't just come out of nowhere. It was building up over the years. And 9/11 was the catalyst for it. And what did this do? Well, it basically predominated, even to this day, and it's dying out now, but almost right from the start, books, films, TV, and then by 2006, when YouTube was invented, boom, all the conspiracies about 9/11 blanketed the actual anomalies, the actual conspiracies that were largely ignored by the very few sane folk at the beginning. Like I said, Paul Thompson and Kevin Fenton, John Gold and Kyle Hentz and John Judge. And we don't hear about these people anymore. And whether it's from a total, like, complete lack of patience on their part, which I can totally understand, or a complete dissatisfaction in not reaching the American public because the disinformation was too much. And I can understand that. And so when you explain 9/11, like other people, maybe they have a better, I guess, a better way of delivering 9/11 to a person, but I can't without mentioning other areas. And so, I talk about a certain point in time, like 1979 would be for me the starting point, even though that doesn't talk about what Wahhabism is. In order to do that, I have to even go further back, or how Israel foreign policy relates to the United States, or how Saudi Arabian foreign policy relates to the United States, because this all comes into play too. I can't start with 79. I have to go further back. With Israel, that depends. That's late 1800s or 1927 or 28. With Saudi Arabia, it's 1932. And really, it just depends on what you think would be a great starting point in telling a story that leads up to 9/11. And without boring everybody here, because I probably bored everybody here with my rantings and discussion, but with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, this helped to create the Arab Afghan Mujahideen. And in the years prior to that, there wasn't much in the way of radical fundamentalism anywhere, for the exception of Egypt, Syria, and Afghanistan, and Pakistan. But Egypt and Syria had nationalist governments that basically kept radical fundamentalists in check, so to speak. Now, you had the Muslim Brotherhood that was operating freely in areas of northern Egypt, northern Syria, and Jordan, but they didn't have much in the way of a large voice. But the growing resentment for the government was there. They just needed a precipitating factor, and they got it in 1979 because there were three events in 1979 that basically put radical fundamentalists on the map: the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the overthrow of the Shah of Iran with the Iranian Revolution, and the Grand Mosque seizure of the Great Kaaba, led by Muhammad al Qutb, who thought he was the next coming of the Mahdi. All of these incidents basically precipitated radical fundamentalism, otherwise known as Wahhabism, which originated out of Saudi Arabia. This mindset overtook the secular socialist governments of the Arab world. And what didn't help was that the United States gave billions of dollars in aid through Pakistan and through their intelligence service, the ISI, as well as donors from Saudi Arabia, the United States, Egypt, Bahrain, Qatar, all pouring in millions of dollars. All these are sympathizers of this radical fundamentalist group, knowing full well that the weapons and training and funding that they would get were to help overthrow the great enemy, which is communism, Soviet Union, which the United States saw as a threat to global hegemony. Or basically, the real threat was to the US being the predominant force around the world. Or as Zygmunt Brzezinski wrote in the Grand Chessboard, the threat to uh, the Caspian Sea, which was the largest untapped oil reserves in the world, north of Iran. They saw that the Soviet Union was making a play by radicalizing Afghanistan, and that Pakistan was next. And that's the reason why Pakistan got involved with Operation Cyclone, which was an operation headed under the Reagan administration, the Carter administration, and later the Reagan administration, in which they saw the CIA conduct the largest operation in the world at the time in the agency's history in giving billions of dollars in aid and weapons aid and training to these Afghan and Arab mujahideen. But we didn't know it then that in 1989, when the war ended, that we basically thought that's it. Everybody gets to go home. Communism is defeated. I wish we lived in an ignorant world just like that. But that's not what happened, did it? Because what happened after that was that all the radical fundamentalists that basically we gave weapons training and aid to decided to take that mentality and use it against the great Satan, which is the United States. And so all these people that went back to countries like Indonesia, the Philippines, the United States, the United Kingdom, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Egypt, all these people, radical fundamentalists, when they entered the war, became even more hardcore radical fundamentalists with military training and use it all around the world to create an even more nefarious enemy than communism, because this would replace communism as the new enemy, radical fundamentalism, or otherwise known as Islamic fundamentalism. In February 26, 1993, We saw the effects of it when they bombed the North Tower of the World Trade Center. People that were involved, like Ramzi Youssef, Mahmoud Abalima, Nidal Ayad, and others, Ahmed Ajaj, came from training camps in Afghanistan. Whether they were direct or indirect proponents of the Operation Cyclone program through the Pakistan ISI. Who taught them how to build these bombs? And I remember when 93 bombing was happening, I was in New York at the time, and just like everybody else, we had no idea what radical fundamentalism was. Who are these people? The hell they do this for? And being that it only killed 6 people, we really didn't give it the serious nature it deserved. What happened? I mean, just to go back, even just to the 93 bombing, you had the first Islamic fundamentalist incident, which was the assassination of Rabbi Meir Kahane from a fundamentalist named El Sayed Nosser. And who's El Sayed Nosser? Well, he's not so much a fundamentalist in the terms of Al Qaeda, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But who was this guy? Well, supposedly he's a jihadist or a fundamentalist from a person named Omar Abdel Rahman, known as the Blind Sheikh. And he was a big deal in New York at the time. He ran a mosque out of Brooklyn, New York, called the Al Farouk, and also in New Jersey called the Masjid Al Salam in Jersey City. A firebrand imam that hated the West, vitriol against Jews. But was it because the women were wearing short skirts? Was it because we were a Christian nation, even though we're secular? We had the freedom to believe in various religions and be non-religious? No, had nothing to do with any of those things. It basically was a response to our foreign policy. But back then, what do we know about foreign policy in the United States? I didn't know nothing. I'm over here rooting for Don Mattingly on the screen. And it wasn't explained to us because the government basically didn't tell us why they were doing this. They just told us the generalities, just like with 9/11. They hate us for our freedoms because they're different and because they're Islamic fundamentalists. And the wrong people were being vocal about Islam. And we didn't know much about Islam, not here in New York anyway, even though we had a large percentage in Brooklyn at the time of Islamic people living in Borough Park and Bushwick, New York, neighborhoods that I lived nearby. And so we really wanted to know who this blind sheikh was, what his radical views were. But we wouldn't get much in the way of information because we didn't have computers back then. And we relied on the newspapers, which are basically just as ignorant as the public when it came to this issue. And what were we told by the FBI and the Joint Terrorism Task Force here in New York? It was the works of a deranged lone gunman. El Sayed Nosser, there's no conspiracy. He just wanted to kill a rabbi. And what do we know about this rabbi? Do we know that he was a radical fundamentalist of his own that created a group that basically is the reason for a lot of the vitriol we see out of the settlers in Israel, the Jewish task force? The hell do we really know about Rabbi Meir Kahane? Why was he killed? Well, Israel really didn't give a shit about him. They were glad he was dead. He was a big headache. And what made it even more appealing was that it was a radical Arab fundamentalist that killed him. Because now they could take it out on the Muslim population, Well, El Sayed Nosair wasn't convicted for the murder of Rabbi Meir Kahane, which really inflamed the Jewish task force, but he was convicted on the gun charge. And here he is talking about carrying out landmark bombings to an FBI informant that we didn't know at the time. Nobody knew. His name was Emad Salem. And boy, what a story that is. Now, I'm not going to get too much into that. I've done videos on it you could look into. I'll just gloss over it, shoot the shit here. Right? Emad Salem goes back and tells his handlers, saying, they're trying to do something. They're building bombs. They want me to build them. They want to bomb Jewish neighborhoods. They want to bomb the World Trade Center. They want to bomb Jacob Javits building, the FBI headquarters, Brooklyn Bridge, the George Washington Bridge, the Empire State Building. These guys are nuts. We got to do something. What did he shut down the fucking case? Why would you do that? Right? Why would you do that? Because according to the FBI and Carlos Dunbar, who was the lead supervisor on the case, he didn't like the fact that Ahmed Salem wouldn't wear a wire. So they created a lot of these rumors about his handler, Nancy Floyd, and Ahmed Salem having intimate relationships and not sharing secrets with the FBI and the Joint Terrorism Task Force in New York. All these type of ludicrous and very rude rumors attributed to both people. So now they got to replace Ahmad Salem. A call is made to Pakistan. It just so happens Ramzi Youssef is coming to New York, but he's not coming alone. He's coming with a guy named Ahmed Ajaj. They're coming from the Wild Jihad training camp, where they learned to build bombs. One of two training camps they went to. But what we didn't know then either was Ahmed Ajaj was no, we didn't know nothing. How could we know anything? So this Mossad asset was recruited out of a prison, which he was in prison for 3 years for counterfeiting dollars. Ahmed Ajad wasn't even a radical fundamentalist. He was a petty crook. So the Mossad asked him to basically infiltrate Hezbollah on behalf of the Israeli Mossad and bring them back information about potential operations. And he played this radical fundamentalist part. And so 1992 comes crawling around. And Ahmadinejad is in training camps in Afghanistan, learning how to build bombs. Was he a Mossad asset then? Did it ever end? Well, we don't know. All I know is they came to the United States. Ramzi Youssef would call Ahmadinejad on how to build a bomb, and so they did. Urea nitrate. And they used it on the North Tower. We believed it. We believed it was radical fundamentalists. They hated our freedoms. Omar Abdul Rahman hated us. And so months later, Emad Salem comes back and infiltrates the mosque again on behalf of the FBI. And they're not done. They're building more bombs. And this was called the Landmarks plot. We got to get the rest of them. So they outfitted this warehouse in Jamaica, Queens, with camera devices and listening devices. And they're all making this, witch's brew of bombs, multiple bombs. The FBI comes in and arrests everybody. And Omar Abdul Rahman gets life in prison. So do the couple of others that were involved. I think it was like 10 other people, 8 to 10 other people. That's it. No more. We don't have any problem. So the FBI basically said that there is no growing radical fundamentalist group. It's all over. Go back to sleep. Watch American Gladiators. as Bill Hicks would say. And believe it or not, most people fell asleep at the wheel. I don't know if the FBI or the intelligence services did, but I can tell you right now, most America did. Because what do we know about radical fundamentalism? But the intelligence services knew because all throughout the 90s, the CIA, the NSA were listening to the phone calls, the satellite phones of bin Laden and his group called Al Qaeda. Who the hell is Al Qaeda? Well, in 1996, hardly anyone knew who bin Laden was or Al Qaeda was. Who the hell were these people? What we did know at the time was that bin Laden and Al Qaeda would have an everlasting effect on not just the American consciousness, but the public consciousness as well, all around the world. This Saudi, who was involved with the Afghanistan war, this billionaire family that have connections to the Bush family that we didn't know at the time, the Saudi bin Laden group, the largest construction group in Saudi Arabia, would have a young son born out of 52 children that basically would grow to resent the United States and Israel because of our foreign policy, not because we were Christians and atheists or gay or straight or that our women showed their cleavage on the beaches. None of that came into play. One thing about bin Laden and Al Qaeda was they were very upfront, unlike most criminals, where you know about the motivations later. Bin Laden wanted to show you his motivations before they even carried out. Unusual in the field of true crime. Very unusual. And we didn't know how to process that information, how to understand it. What are they nuts? I mean, even before the embassy bombings in '98, bin Laden sat behind a map giving an interview with ABC News' John Miller. And the reason why he wanted to show where he's going to bomb, which was East Africa. Now, he said this. So, bin Laden, who's an after effect of the Afghan war, born out of that war and through the ideology that precipitated from it, that goes back many decades, Wahhabism, which helped to create this radical fundamentalist group, Al Qaeda. And in 1996, he created a fatwa where he wanted to kill American soldiers in Saudi Arabia because they were stationed there, building an Air Force strip and training the Saudi Arabian army. Saudi Arabia's army is very lacking, and Saudi Arabia basically needed a military station there to hold off the threat of the Ba'athist regime under Saddam Hussein, which Saddam had no compulsion to invade Saudi Arabia. But that's what was used as a pretext. 2 years later, we had the embassy bombings. This is the first known terrorist incident attributed to bin Laden and Al Qaeda. Even though that there was a earlier bombing at a Yemen U.S. embassy in Yemen in 1996 that killed one person, I think. It was a U.S. service member. But this was the first real devastating bombing. Over 200 people were killed. And it really put bin Laden on the map. And bin Laden would create a second fatwa in 98 in that he created a war on the United States and Israel and to kill every American and every Jew wherever you find them. No matter how you do it, just kill them. So this was an open declaration of war against the United States and Israel and the West. CIA took it to heart and created a station 2 years prior called the Bin Laden Issues Station, otherwise codenamed as Alex Station. The person in charge was Michael Scheuer. Michael Scheuer was an expert on Islamic fundamentalism in Afghanistan, but he was not a case officer. He was an analyst, which is unusual. Case officers usually open up operations. Analysts are the ones who are giving information to case officers to open up operations. There are two types of officers in the CIA: case analysts and case officers. They're not called agents. That's the FBI. They're called officers and analysts. And this would be the lead agency in the world in tracking bin Laden and Al Qaeda. But the one agency that had the most information was the NSA because they were listening to not just bin Laden's satellite phones in the early 90s, but now they were listening to an Al Qaeda communications hub in Yemen in 1996. After the embassy bombings, the FBI in New York opened up the bin Laden unit. And of course, the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is the intelligence agency arm of the Pentagon, would open up their own program called Able Danger, which was a bunch of data analysts and officers that collected public and private information and pulled it together to make connections about what type of Arab fundamentalists were operating inside the United States. CIA would act in a similar fashion, but they would also pull their information not just from one agency, but multiple agencies. But they didn't like sharing information. And this would be a problem, which also led to the success of bombings like the East Africa bombings, the bombings of the USS Cole in 9/11, an unwillingness to share information. In 1999, the CIA created an operation called the Plan. How original is that? Where George Tenet, the newly minted DCI, a bureaucrat in his own right, would hire Cofer Black to head the counterterrorism center, in which he wanted to have or build informants inside Al Qaeda because Cofer Black said that's the only way we could find out the inner workings of this group, this very mysterious insular group. And what we didn't know at that time was that there was another individual who's related to Ramzi Youssef who took an operation, a failed operation, and put it into motion for the planes operation. And his name was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Well, who's that? What we didn't know it at the time was that he was even more mysterious than bin Laden and Ramzi Youssef. He was also not known to many people, even in the intelligence services. Very few people knew who he was. But he's the uncle of Ramzi Youssef, who, back in 1995, would construct an operation called Bajinka, which was basically an international, transnational plot that would have 12 planes outfitted with Timex watch bombs made by Ramzi Youssef and have them all explode over the United States and the Pacific Ocean, 1 minute each, 12 planes, 12 bombs, along with another plotting operation in which they would assassinate Pope John Paul II in the Philippines, because that's where Ramzi Youssef and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed were plotting this group. But there was an associate named Abdul Hakim Murad who was involved with the Pachinko plot, and he told Ramzi Youssef that I have another idea because now they'll be looking for bombs on planes. How about we manually take a plane and crash it into CIA Langley? And because he was a pilot trained inside the United States, Abdul Hakim Murad was, he offered up his own self to hijack the plane and manually crash it into CIA Langley. Later on, when the plot was foiled because of some mistakes, Abdul Hakim Murad told his interrogators in the Philippine police about a hidden plot of the Bajinka plot. And that was that there were sleeper cells inside the United States training at flight schools, and that the hidden plot was that they were going to hijack 10 planes and crash them all over the United States. This would have been absolutely more enormous than 9/11, and also makes you understand about how 9/11 could have been worse, in that when you finally realize that it wasn't just 4 planes involved, there was more. And we know that now because TMZ, of all places, of all venues, TMZ would report a story about Flight 23, which was going to be a potential hijack on September 11, 2001. Well, there were people out there telling you about these incidents. Nelson Martins was one, Paul Thompson was another. Very few people talked about the potential attempted hijackings on September 11th and 13th. Nevertheless, the idea of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was to give to bin Laden about that part of the Pachinko plot in hijacking planes. Now, whether this was known to the intelligence agencies because they were listening, I can only speculate. What do you think Al Qaeda is talking about on those phones? They're not shooting the shit like the rest of us, right? These are serious people that want to attack, that want to plan attacks. So I can only imagine what they were talking on those phones. It's not public, it's classified. And so what we had no idea was that in the year 2000, after the bombing of a naval warship, the USS Cole, which was attributed to Al Qaeda under an operative in Yemen named Tawfiq bin Attash, codename also named Khalad, was that there was an operation in place, and it was called the Plains Operation. And this is 9/11. And all the individuals involved with 9/11 basically didn't know each other. They all came from various imams are the same. They go by the hadiths, which are the memoirs attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, words that not were uttered by him, but by others. And so you have a a huge nexus growing inside the United States that's here involved with this operation that were known to the intelligence services. Now, whether they knew that they were here for the planes operation, we don't know because that information is not released or known to the public. But through the latest revelations, called the Canestrell files, we know that the CIA was operating illegally inside the United States with Saudi intelligence regarding the monitoring of two known Al Qaeda operatives, Khalid al Mihdhar and Nawaf Hazmi, who had attended a high level summit meeting in Malaysia, in which the planner of the Cole bombing was at, Khalad. They're on camera talking to Khalad. So that means the FBI has to get involved, right? Wrong, because this information was not shared to the FBI. And thus, the intelligence services inside the United States, and law enforcement, and immigration, and the State Department had no idea. That's called plausible deniability. They may know about an attack coming, but they don't know the details. Do you think they really want to know the details? No, because they're the ones going to be in front of a camera. They might slip up. I mean, Bush is really too bright. You think you want President Bush knowing all the details? And he doesn't want to know them either. Nevertheless, September 11 happens. It changed the public consciousness forever. It changed the whole world forever. Unlike JFK, unlike World War II, unlike the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the assassination of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Robert F. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, nothing came close to the reverberating effects of 9/11. This was a global response by the global community involved with the war on terror, in which we saw the invasions of countries that had nothing to do with it, like Iraq, later on Syria, Libya, drone strikes in Pakistan, and of course, the longest war in U.S. history, the Afghanistan War, which ended 2 years ago. And so, what can we know about 9/11? Through all the disinformation that's out there, as I mentioned before, and to the little information that we do have. What was 9/11? What is 9/11? Well, if I told you what was 9/11, what is 9/11, that means I got the answers, and I don't. I have more questions than I do answers. And if anybody ever tells you that they solved 9/11, like Christopher Bolin in his book basically says solving 9/11, they're lying to you. If anybody ever tells you that they know what happened on 9/11, they're lying to you. What do we really know? We know very little. And the reason why we know very little is because they don't want us to know. Because the information is that what I suspect and what I could speculate is that they knew these attacks were going to happen, that they knew that these people involved had an idea involving more planes to shut down and destroy travel, to destroy the economy of the United States, in that it basically would destroy the United States forever, precipitating fear that would last for years, destroying the airline industry in one fell swoop. How can we get around? Visiting businesses around all around the world would suffer. So they had to lessen the damages. And in the days after 9/11, that's what they did. They covered up the fact that there were potential hijackings on 9/11 and on September 13th. They covered up the fact that Israeli intelligence and Saudi intelligence were inside the United States. What did they know? What did they collect? Why didn't they share that with us? Well, it all relates back to foreign policy because that's what this is basically a large part of 9/11 was about, to destroy a preconceived enemy so that two countries, governments can control the majority of the Middle East, Israel and Saudi Arabia, for two totally different reasons. One, Israel saw the death of the majority of Arabs or Muslims. Two, Saudi Arabia saw itself as the sole authority of the Middle East as a Muslim caliphate. And they needed the United States to acquiesce to their whims. This doesn't just mean just 9/11. I mean, we see this with a number of terrorist incidents, the Khobar Towers, for one. And of course, the major problem in Israel is the Palestinian Israeli problem that have been going on for 80 years. And when you look at 9/11 in its context of motivations, you'll notice that there's a multitude of questions that have not been answered. And for those who see me as some authority, which I'm not, I mean, look at me shooting a video out of a bedroom here. I don't even have the majority of the answers, or even come close to having even a quarter of the answers, because I still have those questions myself. And there's so much more that I could have talked about, so much more that I missed. But how could I fit it in an hour and 11 minutes? It's impossible without losing the interest of people. I mean, I thought I covered pretty much a little bit of ground here, and it took me an hour. Maybe because I don't know how to condense it. But if I do that and I don't talk about the details, well, then those questions that you have will branch out to other questions. As you could see, 9/11 is a huge topic. And so we have more questions than answers. And this is usually the case with a lot of big incidents. I mean, we have questions about World War One and World War Two, for God's sakes. And it's been a frustrating road for me in the past, I think, 10 years, where I've really been hardcore gung ho 9/11 study. And when I say this, and a lot of people don't realize how much time I put in, I'll tell you, it's almost embarrassing that I spend close to 4 hours a day on 9/11 every day. Either I'm reading files and documents I've never come across. I'm reading a book relating to the terrorist attacks. I'm studying about how governments in Israel and the United States and Saudi Arabia work. I'm studying about how religious fundamentalism works, a lot of how the intelligence agencies work, how they're intertwined with radical fundamentalism. There's a lot. You can see there's a tub here. In this tub is 13 books I have yet to read. On top of this tub are two books currently reading now. In fact, this is the book I'm currently reading. This is a very good book, Fountainhead of Jihad. And this book, Willful Blindness, recommended to me by Darren Harvey. This is next. So there's a lot of things I tend to read. I read more than I listen. I like to read, actually. It gives me a sense of peace, and I got to have a book. I'm a very traditional type of person when it comes to reading. I like to hold the book. I mean, I do read sometimes. I use PDF books, but I like to hold the book. I don't know why. I just think it's more original. But yeah, 4 hours a day, approximately. I upload maybe one or two videos a day. I have over 3,000 on YouTube. I think I'm the largest catalog of 9/11 archive in the world. I have over 117 articles on Medium dedicated to the events of September 11th, and of course my podcast. So, but did I scratch the surface of 9/11 with all that? Probably not. Will I ever? Probably not. But the quest for knowledge keeps going, and that's what drives me. It's almost like a really like I'm stuck in a Hellraiser type of incident where I'm chasing a passion that can never be satisfied. We're chasing a goal that can never be achieved because that's what knowledge can do to you. Your quest for knowledge never really is achieved because you can never know everything. And yet, that's exactly what I want for 9/11. I want to know everything, even though it's a depressing, inherently depressing topic, which made me even more of a stoic person and dulled my senses over the years, destroyed probably any type of social activity of my life. But that doesn't have to happen to you. It's just a warning of what it could do to you when you concentrate too much on a subject. But I'm not doing this for myself. In a way, I am, but I have this naivety in me. I don't know. This is really dumb because I should know better. But it's what drives me too. And I'm glad it does because without it, I'd probably quit. And I thought about it a couple of times, even recently. If you haven't noticed, I haven't been very active this week. I think I uploaded 1 or 2 videos. I became very, very dissatisfied with the response of the latest, greatest revelations we've ever had, which is the Canestraro document, which showed the suspicions that we had over the years that the CIA and Saudis were indeed operating an illegal intelligence ring prior to 9/11. And if that information was shared, could have stopped 9/11 together. And to see this remarkable revelation, just I don't know if you can really appreciate this document. This is hardcore evidence of an illegal operation involving the most nefarious agency in the world, the CIA, as well as a foreign government, Saudi Arabia, and nobody covered it. Nobody fucking covered it. And nobody gave a shit. Yeah, the gray zone did. Props to Max Blumenthal and Aaron Monte and to the few others like Nelson and Sean Russell and Darren and but hardly anyone covered it. That really affected me. And I could say, in all honesty, it made me want to just say, why keep going? If that doesn't if that doesn't catch the attention of the American people, I can understand the media because they're sort of controlled and they're not going to talk about it. But for no one else to talk about it, the story of Jordan Neely was given saturation coverage across the board, which was a guy who was strangled on a New York City subway to residents or to passengers on the train, and he was choked out and he died. That was given intense saturation coverage on all media across the board. This on this remarkable revelation, which is not speculation, this is valid information that condemns the CIA pre 9/11. If it was shared, it stops 9/11. Nothing. Silence. I remember being flabbergasted. If I couldn't believe I did videos and everything. I tried everything in my power, but I don't have a big channel. So I even messaged Jimmy Dore, Dave Smith, Joe Rogan, CNN. I I said, listen, even if you don't interview me, talk about it. Just please talk about it. Do anything. I don't care if it's me. Interview Ryan Dawson. He's a bigger name. You know, somebody. No, silence. And so I was thinking all week, what's the sense? even if it came out. Government came right out, right? Said we could have stopped 9/11, or we were part of 9/11. Even if they said that, would it would it grab attention? Would it grab as attention as Kim Kardashian's ass? I mean, would it be as big a story as Tom Brady playing for another season? I don't know, but I'll keep going because I have nothing else, and because I think we owe it to. I was talking about the naivety of me. The naive part of me is that I still believe in a sense of justice, even though we live in a fraudulent world, a fraudulent justice system. I still believe that there could be this sense of justice for those jumpers and the people that were killed. And if you really want a reminder, if you really need to be put back into your place, there's a phone call you could listen to. And for those who don't know, there was the most harrowing audio in all of 9/11 that I've ever heard is the phone call of Kevin Cosgrove. Kevin Cosgrove was in the North Tower of the World Trade Center. I believe he was on the 110th floor, and he was on the phone with an operator, and he was telling the people, the operator, that he didn't want to die. His wife just gave birth to something like that. He goes, "We got guys up here. We don't want to die yet." And seconds later, as he said that, you hear this crumbling sound, this large rumbling sound, and he screams, "Oh God, no!" And then the phone call is shut off. So what happens is you actually hear the building crumbling on top of him. It's the only call in all of 9/11 that captures the moment of inside the building at the time of it collapsing. Kevin Cosgrove phone call. Look it up. The only other audio that captured my attention was the Jim Jones death tape, which is also on YouTube, the day that they all die in Jonestown. That captures the horror of death, the finality of it. Even though it doesn't affect me because, like I said, I'm very almost dead inside emotionally. But if you need a harrowing reminder about what 9/11 is about, well, that's what it's about. It's not about your questions and your speculations and what you're going through and what you perceive 9/11 as. It's about that guy who is basically one out of 2,997 people that were killed on September 11, 2001. It's the voices that can't speak because they're dead, because they are the first victims of 9/11. After 9/11, you have 4.5 million people more. But for 9/11, that's what should drive you. If you ever lose hope, if you ever lose faith, or if you ever run into that rut of like, we're not getting anywhere, no one's listening to me, it's not true. You'll catch an ear or an eye or both, and you may not realize it. That person may not be commenting on your video. He may not be vocal. He may not know how to be vocal, but you're reaching an audience, the unseen audience, just like the unseen audience that should drive you for 9/11, which are the souls of the dead that came out of this horrible incident. So I use that as my driving force to keep going because that's what it's all about. And I think that's where I can end it here tonight. And for those who are still taking interest, for those who watch or listen to my videos or Sean Russell's or Darren Harvey's or Nelson Martin's or Ryan Dawson's, and to the podcast for New American Century, Ben and Eric, there are still good sources out there and we're growing. In fact, there is a new revitalization of 9/11 truth. The old conspiracy theorists that I talked about before, they're almost extinct because they learned nothing new. And I'm starting to see some new faces, and that gives me hope, even for an old hopeless soul like myself. So maybe there is hope after all, but we have to get to it because time is not on our side, certainly. And there could be another incident like COVID that basically will overtake the story of 9/11. So we need more people out there as possible to bring attention, whether you do it in written form, video form, audio form. I've always enticed you with these live videos to do more, because I have faith in you. If people like Rebecca Roth and Christopher Bolin and Jason Burmis can write books and do films, what do you think you could do when you have information at your disposal? I'm not a camera person. I was very shy in the beginning, but I feel that the information is more important than how I sound or how I look, because it's what's in here that counts, and what's in here that counts as well, as opposed to how you look and sound. And remember what you're ultimately doing it for. And yes, we're up against a mountain and a molehill, fighting a war on two fronts of disinformation and a fight for information. But as long as we keep putting this in the public sphere through word, through audio, through action, as long as you do your part, no matter how big or small, it's still your part. And that's what's important. And so, guys, have a good night. Thank you for staying and listening to me and listen to my personal thoughts on the matter. And I'll see you in the next video. Have a great weekend, guys.